Welcome back to the European Parliament in Strasbourg for the second part of Talking Europe. My guest today is Nikephoros Diamandouros, a Greek academic. He has served as the EU's ombudsman since 2003. As the EU's chief mediator, his mission is to investigate cases of maladministration within the EU's institutions. Those cases include poor access to documents, abuse of power, or discrimination. Now, I add that the name of my guest was recently floated as a potential successor to former Greek Prime Minister George Papandreou. Mr. Diamandouros, thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here.
We'll talk a lot about your role as ombudsman, of course, but as a Greek citizen, I'd like to start with the situation in Greece. Following Papandreou's resignation, we know that the former European Central Bank Vice President Loukas Papademos was chosen to lead an interim government. Are you confident that he will be able to restore the credibility of Greece and to secure those badly needed bailout tranches of money that needs to be paid to Greece?
You know, you said I'm a political scientist. A political scientist is a different thing than a prophet. So I cannot tell you that I am confident, and other than that, I'm very confident that Mr. Papademos is uniquely qualified and best qualified given his experience not only as the Vice President of the European Central Bank, but also as the former Governor of the Bank of Greece and Deputy Governor. Therefore, a very long experience in matters financial. I think he's uniquely qualified to be able to actually do it. He's the best man for the job. So therefore, I hope he'll be able to do it, and I will applaud, as a Greek citizen, all his efforts.
Let me ask you a very personal question. Serving as the Greek Prime Minister must be one of the toughest jobs in the world nowadays, given the context. You were approached. Do you think it's still possible to do the job?
Hope dies last is the answer. In other words, yes, I think that in any given situation, there's obviously a room for doing it. Yes, it's a very hard job. You are looking at Italy as well, with Mr. Monti is going to have perhaps a more difficult job in the sense that he's dealing with a country of 63 million, you know, and a huge economy and special weight in the European Union. I think it's always a matter of choices, and I think that the Greek Prime Minister's job is extraordinarily difficult, but given the appropriate support, both domestically and from the European Union, I think it can be done.
What was your first reaction, your first thought when you were approached as a potential successor? Mission impossible?
No, a sense of a moral obligation as a citizen to consider something at a moment when my country was in dire straits.
Let me ask you, as somebody who is trying to secure transparency and the involvement of people in the European process, we know that Mr. Papandreou was castigated by his European partners for launching the idea of organising this referendum on the European bailout. But after all, wasn't it a good idea to consult the Greek people?
Well, it's always a good idea to consult the people, and democracy is consulting people. How you consult them, however, makes a difference. Referenda are a particularly difficult instrument of democracy. You can ask in a referendum something very simple. Do you want a monarchy? Do you want a republic? Okay. But you cannot ask very, very complicated questions. Okay. I can refer you to the fact that in Spain, former Prime Minister González came close to defeat when he put the decision to enter NATO to a referendum. And privately, he's known to have regretted it after the fact because he barely scraped through. So referenda are not particularly good instruments for doing things like that. Of course, you've got to consult the people. You've got to give the people the right to be able to decide. But to tell them, here's 500 pages, have you read all the footnotes, and what is your opinion, something like that, I think is unjust and unfair for the people themselves.
Let me carry on those thoughts. I understand that what we need at this stage is stability in Greece, stability on the markets. Now, this interim government could only last 3 months, apparently, because early elections will be called. Wouldn't it be better to keep it for a certain amount of time to make sure that the reforms pass and that the markets see that Greece is delivering?
I think the answer to that question is, again, that we'll see how things go. I think this government is charged with two sets of responsibilities. One is to take all the necessary measures to ensure that the decision taken in the 27th of October, by the European Council are properly implemented. If it takes 60 days or 70 days or 80 days, it is not for me to say. I think these steps are very clearly set in that particular agreement, and therefore I think this is going to drive the actual length of the government. The second thing is to prepare for elections as soon as feasible once these particular goals have been met. So my own sense is that it's going to be a short-term government, but I would not necessarily bet that it will have to be the 19th as opposed to the 27th of February or whatever. In fact, the logic of events will be, it will be, of course, for the parties supporting the government and for the government to determine, but I would not necessarily, I think it is carved in stone, and it constitutes a constraint that could be damaging.
As you said, Greece is still waiting for the last tranche of the first bailout plan. We saw the latest figures coming out from Greece. They don't bode very well. The economy shrank by 5% over the third quarter. There's no doubt the economic reforms will be painful, although, as you said, they are probably necessary. We're going to talk about this, but first, let's have a look at our report.
Throughout the negotiations to replace George Papandreou, Greek leaders knew the clock was ticking in the race to unlock the next round of EU and IMF money.
My problem is to unblock the sixth tranche of bailout money and pass the bailout agreement for the country to acquire a new government, particularly during this very crucial time.
This payment has already been signed off by Eurozone finance ministers, but the IMF still needs to agree. Its board is meeting on November the 21st to discuss the matter. Finance Minister Evangelos Venizelos has said that Greece needs the €8 billion tranche by December the 15th, or the country will go bankrupt. Also on the busy agenda for the new Prime Minister is putting in place the latest round of austerity measures demanded by Greece's EU and IMF paymasters. These include putting 30,000 civil servants on a year's notice with a substantial pay cut in the meantime, raising sales tax from 19% to 23%, privatising assets ranging from the state lottery to airports, energy supplies and the country's railways, and lowering the tax-free bracket from €12,000 to just €5,000. Now that a Prime Minister has finally been chosen, he doesn't have long to act. New elections are expected to be held on February the 19th.
William Edwards reporting there. Mr. Diamandouros, austerity, 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 cuts, cuts, cuts. This all leads to more recession. Aren't we caught up in a vicious circle?
There are some people who are arguing that. I'm not an economist and I cannot possibly tell you, in any kind of a serious way. This is clearly, however, the political preference and the political choice of the European Union at this point. It's clearly a policy that's being applied not only in Greece, but also in Ireland and in Portugal and in Spain and in Italy, and has also been applied in the Baltic countries. Maybe
a more philosophical question for the political scientist. Is Greece still a sovereign state? We get the impression that all decisions are dictated by the IMF, by France and by Germany.
I think that to answer that question fairly, you have to start from the fact that the very notion of the European Union means that if you go into the Union, you necessarily give up part of your sovereignty. So in that sense, all the member states of the European Union, in fact, have given up part of their sovereignty voluntarily.
But some are bigger than others.
Clearly.
And some seem to have a bit of a say in this, France and Germany.
France and Germany, well, it depends whether it's an issue of some are bigger than others or whether some also have a greater say because they have a better financial situation in which to base themselves, okay? Very clearly, I think, Greece has found itself in a position of significant weakness because it overspent relative to its own means, and therefore now, in fact, the chicken have come home to roost, and they're having to, in fact, face up to that situation, okay? But when it comes to the issue of sovereignty, again, I would repeat, that sovereignty, shared sovereignty, is a quintessential characteristic of the Union in its own inception and conception.
Let's talk about your role as ombudsman. You've been the EU's ombudsman since 2003. I believe it's a Swedish word. It means mediator. Your role is to investigate cases of maladministration within the European institutions. I saw that last year you received over 2,600 complaints from citizens, companies and NGOs. Does it mean that European citizens are unhappy with the way the EU works at the moment?
Listen, there is no such thing as a perfect administration. Okay? So therefore, by definition, you would expect that citizens in any country, in any legal order, will have problems with the administration at one point or another. And the issue is to have in place the appropriate instrument and institution that will be able to, in fact, help the citizens overcome the problem. The ombudsman is indeed a Swedish word. It means really he who acts on behalf of, therefore as a representative, not really a mediator, which is a narrower term. The ombudsman is precisely this kind of an institution. It has grown hugely since the Second World War. Why? Because the welfare state has exploded in size and importance since the Second World War. And that is why, in fact, you had only 2 ombudsmen in the world prior to 1955, and you now have about 123.
Nikiforos Diamandouros, tell us very concretely, who can complain and what can you complain about?
I will give you 3 answers. First of all, who can complain? Any citizen of the European Union, any resident of the Union, irrespective of citizenship, and any business association or whatever that has its registered office in EU territory can come to me. If they're unhappy with the European public administration, which is the second point, to come to me, there have to be 2 conditions met. First, you have to have a breach of either EU law or EU rules. Secondly, by an EU institution, which means that if you are unhappy with the way EU law is being applied in a particular country, then you have to go to the ombudsman of that country, not to the European ombudsman.
If I'm not happy with the euro, can I complain and send you a letter?
No, you can only complain to me about matters that have to do with the implementation and application of laws and rules. So if you're unhappy with the euro is too broad and too vague a conception or a question for it, I can answer. But if it involves the issue of adopting the euro, changing the euro, these are political decisions taken by the political bodies that lie clearly outside the realm of the ombudsman's mandate, which is administration, not legislation.
Is there a case that stands out in particular?
Over the 8 years that I've been the ombudsman?
Yes.
I'd rather say to you that there is a class of cases that stands out, and these are the cases where, in fact, I manage to help people that are in need, be it at the level, of health, but also at the level, of a sense of fairness. Fairness is a very important ingredient of what the ombudsman does, because the ombudsman goes beyond the law. The law is the minimal condition one expects of the public administration, but the ombudsman wants more of a good public administration than merely not to break the law. And therefore, being fair, being equitable, being proactive, reaching out to citizens is what I'm trying to do, and all the cases that subscribe to this logic is what make me happy.
Geographically, do people in certain countries complain more than others?
There are 2 ways of looking at that: absolute numbers and
proportionally.
Proportionately, the biggest by proportion is Malta, then Cyprus, then Luxembourg, then Belgium. So the smaller countries rather than the southern countries.
Interesting.
But that's a function of the proportion of population as of the total of the EU population.
Nikiforos Diamandouros, you earlier mentioned health. Now there is a case which grabbed headlines in France. It's that of Mediator, a drug used to treat diabetes and obesity in Europe. Now, as early as '98, the European drug agencies had been alerted about possible danger about a particular drug. French health officials say today that it may have killed hundreds. Now, I know that you previously received complaints against the European Drug Agency. Can we still trust it when we see that it, in effect, didn't do anything regarding Mediator?
I have not received any complaint concerning the drug Mediator. Therefore, I do not have a in-depth knowledge of what was at stake there. I have received a large number of complaints concerning what is now called the European Medicines Agency in London, which I visited and had a very long visit with them as recently as a few months ago. And I can report that I was happy with the fact that they decided to accept my recommendation and change their policy concerning transparency and concerning also putting out in public information concerning drugs, clinical studies, and all the kind of basic raw data that are needed to be able to evaluate what they're doing. They certainly accepted my recommendation concerning an anti-acne drug and also an anti-obesity drug, which had come to me, which had produced significant complaints. The son of the complainant of the anti-acne drug had actually regrettably and tragically committed suicide.
That was in Ireland, I believe.
That was in Ireland. So following all of that, I was very pleased to see that the agency changed its policy and now has adopted a policy of transparency that allows it to be able to make all this information available to the public.
Now, this might interest you as somebody who promotes transparency. This week, Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, called for tighter European integration. She floated a revolutionary idea, the election of the President of the EU Commission by Europeans, by European nationals. Is this an idea that you welcome?
I will obviously comment as a citizen, not as a European Ombudsman, because it's not my job to do that as a European Ombudsman. As a citizen, I am wholeheartedly in favour and applaud any kind of advances that would make citizens able to enjoy more the rights which the Treaty of Lisbon gives them for the first time, which is more consultation, more participation, more democracy. I think that would strengthen the political arm of the European Union, and I think this would be a very, very good development.
Nikiforos Diamandouros, Ombudsman of the European Union. I add that you've held this position since 2003.
Correct.
Thank you very much for being our guest in this edition of Talking Europe.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for watching our program. Please stay tuned on France 24 for more news from all of us here in Strasbourg at the European Parliament. Goodbye.